Okay, everybody, we have reached the top of the hour, so let's get started with today's L10 webinar, Customer Relationships Unmasked, Keeping Your Distance and Your Influence, sponsored by CMR Institute. My name is Tim Sosby. I'm Editorial Director for L10. It's my pleasure to welcome you today and to serve as a host of our webinar. I'm going to start here with some quick housekeeping items for you. We've got a very busy panel discussion program for you and some great content, so I'm going to let us jump right into that as quickly as possible. We are planning a 60-minute session for you. You'll notice that your phones are on mute, so any questions or comments you have, please submit them using the questions window on that control panel there on the right side of your screen. Just type in your question, your comment as it occurs to you. When it's fresh in your mind, hit the submit button. We'll try to get to it as quickly as possible or save it for Q&A, but again, please do send these in, the thoughts in while they're fresh in your mind. Also on that control panel, I want to point out the handouts window. There are several handouts in there you may wish to download, including a copy of today's presentation slides. There's also some information on the upcoming L10 Connect virtual forum and some information on our 2020 Preferred Industry Partner Program, which includes CMR Institute, and also the L10 e-Learning Lounge. So feel free to download any or all of those. You can highlight the title, and it will walk you through downloading to your desktop. And if you have any issues, just reach out to me. My email address is showing here, and I can always get you that information. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. We're going to send you a follow-up email later this afternoon with a link to the recording. It'll also be posted to the L10 website, and I'll share that address with you after we leave or at the end of today's webinar. And speaking of sharing, when you leave today's webinar, a follow-up survey is going to appear on a separate browser window. Please do take a moment, look for that survey, and share your thoughts with us. We appreciate your feedback. Okay, with all that said, I'm going to turn things over to Laura Hegwer today. Laura is our moderator, is a healthcare writer and editor with Vital Communications. She can be serve as our moderator and host of today's program. Laura is also the former editor of L10's Focus on Training magazine. She writes for several industry publications covering healthcare finance, policy and legislation, healthcare information technology, innovation, and of course, lately the COVID-19 pandemic. Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you all today. So I'd like to start off by introducing our virtual roundtable. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Anthony Slonim, who is joining us by phone today. He's the president and CEO of Renown Health. Dr. Slonim has led Nevada's only locally owned, not-for-profit integrated health system since 2014. Last year, he was named one of the 50 most influential clinical executives by Modern Healthcare. He's also chairman of CMR Institute's board of directors. Dr. Slonim, thanks for joining us today.
Laura, it's so great to be with all of you guys this morning.
Great. All right, so next I'd like to welcome Regine Bolin. She is also joining us by phone. She is the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Network and Chief Supply Chain Officer at Ochsner Health System, which is based in New Orleans. Previously, she served as Vice President of Supply Chain Operations at NYU Langone Health System in New York City. Regine, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you, panelists. Looking forward to this.
Great. Okay, so our last speaker is joining us by video, as you can see. That's Dr. Gifford Lorenz. Dr. Lorenz is a practicing pulmonologist in Savannah, Georgia. He's also an assistant clinical professor of pulmonary medicine at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. He helped launch a pulmonary telemedicine program and formed the Savannah Cardiopulmonary Rehab Program. He has also served on the board of the American Association of Cardiovascular and Pulmonary Rehabilitation. Dr. Lorenz, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. All right, so I'd like to move on to the next slide, which has our learning objectives. And we'll just briefly go over what we hope to accomplish today. First, I'd like to help us understand some of the lesser known challenges that your customers are facing during the pandemic. Second, I'd like us to identify some strategies for healthcare sales professionals that they can use to stay relevant and provide value to their customers during the COVID-19 crisis. And then lastly, we hope to help you develop a long-range perspective on fostering customer partnerships during this critical time. But before we get started with the discussion with our panel, I was hoping we could start off by getting a sense for when you expect to bring most of your representatives back in the field. So Tim, you've got a question that you're going to help us field with the audience.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm launching that poll right now, folks. We'd love to get your input on this question. When do you plan to have most reps back in the field? Pick A, please, if you expect to have most of your reps back by the end of June. B, if you're looking at the third quarter. C, if you're looking at the fourth quarter. D, if you're looking at early 2021. And choice E, if you've not yet established a timeline. And I see the votes are coming in quickly, Laura. I'm going to ask everybody to make their choices as quickly as we can, and we'll move the program ahead. I do see a winner, but I'm not going to say it's a strong winner here in terms of what we're saying. Everybody, thank you again for voting. I'm going to ask everyone to just wrap up their choices here in the next couple of seconds. Great, everybody. Thanks so much for sharing with us. We appreciate that. Let me go ahead and close this out. And Laura, here are the results. Everybody should see this in the room at the same time. It looks like 39% of the people expect to have reps back in the field by the end of June, which is great news, next month. 32% have not had a timeline yet, so we've got both a little bit aggressive and a little bit unsure still. And then another 19% in the third quarter, and 7% fourth quarter, 3% next year.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm actually surprised by that and encouraged to hear that. That is somewhat consistent with what I've been hearing and reading, but I had actually thought it would be more toward the third quarter, so that's good to hear. So hopefully today what we can do is get some ideas from the panel on how we can make this time that your reps are away from their customers the most productive. So with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and talk with our panel about how they've been weathering the pandemic and what they need most from sales representatives right now. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Lorenz, on our video today. So you're part of a group practice in Savannah with 14 pulmonary, critical care, and sleep medicine specialists, as well as several nurse practitioners and physician assistants. So can you start off by telling us how this pandemic has affected your ability to see patients?
It's affected us significantly, of course. We're probably down about a third in the office in terms of office, kind of patient flow. We're down probably about the same in the hospital, and that's interesting. I can talk about that later if you want. We are seeing people through a variety of ways. Some the traditional way, if there's a real special need to be in the office per se. Some people go to the back door or near the back door in the parking lot, and I go out and don some special protective gear if we think that they might have something that's contagious, like COVID. And then we do a lot of virtual visits. Of course, it's dependent on what technology is available really to our patient population.
Mm-hmm. So what about sales representatives? Have you been meeting with them either virtually or in person?
I've seen a few in person. We're way down in terms of contacts. We've seen some virtually and some just texting or emailing back and forth. The virtual visit work really pretty well.
Had you done any virtual visits before the crisis?
Well, actually, I think on a couple of occasions where we also combined it with, say, a webinar where other people in the around the country were involved in it because they had a speaker.
So when you've had support from your representatives during this time, what kind of support has been most valuable?
The representatives that we work with that are involved in pharmaceuticals, a lot of times they provide educational materials and/or samples, and so we've tried to keep up with that. their sort of dwell time, face-to-face time with us is obviously way down, but it can be improved if they've got the capability of being somewhat flexible and doing things through the virtual technology.
Very good. So Dr. Lorenz, we're going to check back with you in a minute. So let me move on then to Dr. Slonim, who's on the phone with us. So Dr. Slonim, I'm sure you've got some reactions to what Dr. Lorenz just mentioned. Can you tell us, has the experience been similar for physicians with Renown Health?
Well, thank you again, Laura. And I think that for us, one of the things that was a responsibility early on in the conversation was to make sure that we shut down our buildings, our hospitals, our medical groups. And so that included restricting access to our volunteers who are usually elderly and vulnerable, all students, medical students, nursing students, et cetera, and representatives from pharma and device industries. And that was an important piece of work to do early on. We have not yet opened up in that way. I expect it will be a phased roll in over the course of time. But to answer your question, it's actually interesting. I although I'm the CEO, have relationships with a number of representatives, and in the last week have spoken to 3 of our reps by phone because we have a relationship. And I think for those early adopter companies that have been very focused on relationship building and value adds around population health, not just sales, they're the winners here because they've been developing that core competency over the period of time and have been able to demonstrate their value to outcomes of patients. Not only improvements in the quality of care that's delivered, but also improvements in the efficiency and total cost of care. And we haven't, for those companies, skipped a beat. For those who require a mechanism that they have to be with us to sell us, that's a different conversation. And they have restricted access just because of the world we're functioning in at the moment.
And I'm guessing too that these sales representatives that you have a longstanding relationship, they come with the understanding of the inherent challenges that you're facing in the C-suite during this time too. They're sensitive to that.
Without a doubt, and I hope to lead a group of 400, a multi-specialty group of 400 physicians, and we've also locked down access to them as a part of this. And what's been important in the conversation, and I'm sure Regine will have a point about this, we've allowed all of that work to be managed through our supply chain executives, because that's the place where those relationships and the bandwidth actually goes really deep. And so we've just kind of organized a little bit differently during the pandemic. And I think that those relationship changes will be sustained over time as we work our way through the pandemic.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Slonim. So why don't we jump over to Regine then, since we're talking about the supply chain. So Regine, we know that supply chain leaders like yourself have been facing unprecedented challenges with the COVID-19 crisis. So can you tell us a little bit about what life has been like for you over the past few months?
Sure. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Dr. Slonim, for the shout out here, because you're absolutely correct. So I'm here in New Orleans, and actually today is a significant day for us because this is the day that we are reopening with phase 1. So we are anticipating, we're just really excited about this, and at the same time, also a little bit apprehensive because the dreaded supposed second peak or second wave is also something that's real that we're also anticipating. So to answer your question about what it's been like, it's been nothing but chaos in a way, but thankfully it's been somewhat organized chaos. It's been, 9 months? 9 weeks now. It seems like 9 months. 9 weeks, 10 weeks since this whole thing started here in New Orleans. And we actually were peaking at the same time that New York was. So, which made it very, very interesting and very challenging, because you were talking about in terms of in terms of impact, in terms of amount of cases that were happening, we were basically peaking at the same time and competing with each other. That made it extremely challenging. So, I found myself in the in the command center very early on, just pulling on all the resources that I had available at my disposal to be able to successfully bring the organization through the whole episode. It was nothing short of literally a village effort. From the team, from the physician partners, from the frontline workers, from everybody just started to roll in the same direction, just to make sure that we were ensuring the safety of our patient and our caregivers, because that was something that was really paramount. And for me as a supply chain leader, I wanted to make sure that we did not end up on the front page of the news, because of lack of PPE. And so I had to be extremely resourceful in order to get through this. But in a very weird way, it was also very rewarding to be able to go through this and see the fruits of all the hard work that everybody put through, especially those on my team.
Regine, can you briefly mention how you worked with suppliers, or what suppliers did during this time that was really supportive to you?
Thank you, Laura, for that prompt. Definitely. One thing that I found to be extremely valuable is that many, many, many of my supplier relations reached out to me proactively to ask how they could help. And I think what's really important to note here is that some of those folks are people whom I knew professionally from my, past life, but didn't have a relationship per se with the current organization in which I am. But people just rallied around and just said, "Hey, Regine, how can I help you? I know we don't have a relationship with Auctioner, but I understand that, you are in a hot spot." And like I said, on one end, it was a good thing that we were going in with New York, and on the other end, it was not necessarily so good because a lot of attention, was just like, split between the two. But I was just fortunate to have great business relations, come to me and just say, "How can I help you?" So I was able to lean on some of those folks, not only in a traditional way, but also in a non-traditional way. So I found myself going into their own supply chain processes where I followed the breadcrumbs all the way to their own, suppliers, to their own, raw manufacturing products and stuff like that. So that was really, really, really creative in a way. We got ourselves, working together, engaged in some very meaningful and deep interaction with many of, those in the vendor community. And I cannot thank them enough for stepping in, stepping up, leaning in, and, standing in the arena with me. That made a world of difference, to be able to have those relationships, come through in the way that they did.
Thank you, Regine. That's good to hear. So let's then move on to our next slide. We heard both from Dr. Lorenz and Dr. Slonim that they've actually had some virtual meetings with their customers. So we'd like to know, Tim, can you handle this question? How successful have your reps been at securing virtual sales calls with their customers?
Thank you, Laura. And I have launched that question. So, folks, if you could make your choice on how successful have your reps been at securing virtual sales calls with customers. A, have they been able to get in touch with at least half their customers? B, between 1/4 and 1/2? C, less than 1/4? Or D, not yet implemented virtual selling? And once again, everybody, thank you so much for voting quickly. I appreciate that. The votes are coming in quickly. If you can make your choices, we'll keep the program moving ahead for you. And again, Laura, we're seeing some an interesting mix of responses coming in right now. Everybody, I'm going to ask you to wrap up your choices here in just the next couple of seconds, and we'll close the poll out. Great, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate that. Let me close the poll, and we'll look at the results together. Here we go. Looks like 60% of you, the largest percentage, the virtual teams have had virtual calls with less than one quarter of their clients, 24% between a quarter and a half, 10% with at least half, and 6% not yet implemented.
Well, that one I actually guessed right. So I'm,
There you go.
I know it's a challenging time for everybody in the field, and I know a lot of companies are still rolling out some of their virtual selling technology. So what I'd like to do is spend some time talking to our panel about some of the ways that we can hopefully help you help your sales representatives get get the meetings that they need virtually with their customers. So, given these challenges, I'd like to start out by asking our roundtable about their thoughts on what you as trainers can do to help help your sales teams get their customers' attention and make them more likely to interact with representatives. So we know that virtual selling is here. Let me start with Dr. Lorenz, since you mentioned that this is something that you've engaged in with a few representatives. How would you like reps to approach you to set up a virtual call?
Either through my office manager or with me directly. Many of them have my cell phone and email address, and my schedule tends to be pretty hectic because I kind of wear several different hats, and I like to be pretty intimately involved in scheduling things to make sure I don't get inadvertently overbooked. And so I'm pretty accessible. Most of them try to contact me late in the day after my clinical work is done, unless I'm on call that night. And that's how we kind of go at it.
And how long have these calls, these virtual sales calls lasted? Are they fairly brief, or are they a little bit longer?
As I mentioned before, I've had some calls where we kind of included a meeting, a lecture with it, but otherwise, the meetings can be 15 to 30 minutes.
Now, is there anything that a sales representative would do in that initial invitation to have a virtual sales call that would be kind of an instant turnoff, that would not be something that you would be interested in engaging further with them?
It needs to be kind of not mysterious. It just needs to be straightforward, and there needs to be a header that's accurate and relevant and kind of sets the hook in terms of getting my interest. So that it's relevant to what I do.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it needs to be. I'm sorry, Dr. Lorenz.
That's okay. If I can be helpful to them, I'd be happy to. And sometimes it's appropriate for me, and sometimes it's better that I refer it to one of my friends and colleagues.
Very good. All right, let's move on then to Regine. I wasn't sure if you've been able to engage with any representatives in virtual sales calls. Have you done that since the pandemic?
No sales call at this point because, frankly, there hasn't been any time to do anything but focus on all things COVID-19. However, we have had interactions and virtual meetings and huddles with especially our key suppliers, our key vendors, and those, I mentioned earlier who wanted to avail themselves, to us and make themselves available to help in whatever way. So I had the opportunity to have plenty of virtual meetings per se, but no sales meeting because, frankly, the focus right now is not on that. And especially so it's more about diverging and not converging. By that, I mean, we were not in the process and still today of saying, okay, well, we're going to be picky with our choices It was about getting what we could that was the most appropriate for, what we need to do. And so a lot of things around standardization, around all those things kind of like went by the wayside a little bit because it was about getting our hands on the products and services and equipment that we needed at the time. And so there was really no time for sales per se, but lots of great virtual interaction and, that really penned out some great dividends.
I'm guessing that any value analysis activities too have been put on hold for now, correct?
Absolutely. No value analysis. Actually, yesterday we had our first, what we call our reset conversation, where we're starting to relay the foundation as to what it's going to look like for the next few weeks, few months, really, until the end of the year. We run on a calendar year, so we're trying to figure out what's going to be meaningful, what's going to make sense for us to tackle from that standpoint. Because at the same time, it's a great opportunity to approach conversations that we wanted to have about perhaps market penetration, better market penetration for some of our vendors, in order to really move the needle. I'm sure everybody's going to be coming out of this, hungry for different action items and hungry to find a way to get back to black ink again, but it's going to be very interesting. So we had our call yesterday where we talked about areas we want to tackle. It's the usual ones, it's your ortho, neuro, cardio. We want to start to take a look at that, but also we're keeping an eye on our clinics because the ambulatory clinics also open earlier this week, and we're going to be fully ramping up next week. Elective surgery started. So lots of activities are starting back up again, and I suspect that we're going to use that as an opportunity to selectively engage some folks, and engage in some value analysis activities.
So if a sales representative were to approach you, say with an invite to a virtual sales call or an in-person meeting when you're opening up again, what would make you more likely to engage with them?
Well, I think it's going to be about relevancy, and it's going to be about being precise as to what it is that you want to get out of the meeting. Because of course I guess it's no different because from sales perspective, I know that I hear a lot of sales folks say how it's very difficult to get through to us, but more so this time around because we truly are focusing on making sure that we're mitigating this episode here. But somebody at this point, if they wanted to get my attention, they need to come crisp, clear, clean about what it is that they'd like to talk to me about and what is the value prop that they're seeing, at least, based on their own empirical research, based on what they know about, the organization, based on what they know about what's been going on in the past 9 weeks. I would want somebody to come with, some really specific information, no fluffiness and no generalities or platitudes, because that's not really going to go far. Because right now we have the time, time attention of maybe an ant. It's just no more than that. We're just all over the place trying to figure out what to do and how to do it and multitasking. And at the same time, understanding that we also need our vendor community. We need those partners with us as well. But it just needs to be a meaningful type of conversation. This is not the time to call and want to fish information, want to find out stuff. No, we don't have time for that right now. Right now, it's more around the solutions and what you can bring to the table and how you can help to stand in the gap with us. That will definitely get my attention and, at least open the dialogue and get other stakeholders involved as well, because we are in a world now where we realize that the paradigm shift is in full motion and, there are no more sacred cows. This is an opportunity to look at something differently that we didn't look at before. This is an opportunity to look at a completely different solution that we didn't think was going to work, and to really be creative and think out of the box.
Thank you, Regine. All right, I'd like to bring Dr. Slonim in now. Dr. Slonim, based on what you've heard from Dr. Lorenz and Regine, do you have any initial reactions to what they've mentioned about what it takes to engage a customer during this time?
Yeah, I think, Laura, amazing conversation here. 3 takeaways for me. Takeaway number 1, you can hear in what might be your customer's voice a level of fear and anxiety that you have not heard before, because we're not sure where the future of our health systems for our community lands. And that fear and anxiety goes to a very fundamental level, which I think is important if you're going to sell to people. When we're locked in a very vegetative part, that kind of old brain focus, which manages your breathing and your heartbeat, things you don't pay attention to, we are head down in crisis management and can't think of anything else besides that work. And that's really important, because the new brain functions if we're going to emerge through, and notice I didn't say past, but through COVID, because it's part of our new normal. We believe here at Round Health that there are members of the team who have to be head down and executing, making sure that we've got the right supply chain, making sure we're doing testing, keeping the ORs closed and the visitors at bay. And there are other members of the team, myself included, who have not stopped work at all on the strategic focus of the organization. Because if I stop my strategy, I will be dead in the water. And that's why I'm engaging. And I think that there's an opportunity for folks who are working with health systems to look for new partners in that system. While previously you may have been working in the supply chain folks, or I know my chief nursing officer, my chief medical officer have been head down in the command center 24/7, 365 for 8 weeks. I don't go to the command center. It's not my job to go to the command center. When I walk in the command center, I'm not in charge. They're in charge. And for me, I have to make sure that the organization stays on track for the long game, 3 to 5 year time horizon. And so in contrast to Regine, one of the things that I've been doing is actually escalating our value-based strategy. I believe that there's no better time, since I have time on my hands, to make sure that we're delivering reductions in variation. I'm looking for those people who are calling me through the crisis, seeing what kind of opportunities and deals we can make, not necessarily related to COVID, but to keep our everyday business running. And I think that that's important as well, because there are other customers who, for life sciences industry folks, who may not be head down in COVID. I've talked in the last week to 5 health plan CEOs. They're sitting on the sidelines waiting for something to happen,
right,
and figuring out what goes on. And there's a great opportunity if you haven't built up relationships with the leadership teams of health insurance plans. Those would be my first calls later this afternoon, is to see where you can get on those calendars. I think the second thing that is really important for us, and it goes to a potential customer base as well, is this tension point between what I call the medical model and the public health model. Every day in healthcare, we deal in a medical model. The doctor and the patient, the doctor and their patient have an important relationship that needs to be sustained. And doctors and nurses and others are aimed at making sure that family and that patient get everything they can need. We advocate on behalf of the patient. And by law and regulation, when you enter a state or a federal emergency like we're in now, the public health model takes jurisdiction. What does that mean? That means that independent physician decision-making goes by the wayside. It becomes the ultimate population-based model. Why? Because in conditions of scarcity, not enough ventilators, not enough masks, not enough gowns, people will die from the scarcity. And as a result of that, you don't want that burden being held by frontline nurses and doctors. So you make them in the political context. You let the governor make the decision, not that they're obviously informed by doctors and public health professionals, but you take the burden off of the frontline professional. That's really important learning here, because it's the very first time that we've been in that mix as a nation and as a world. Now, Regina may have some really interesting ideas about how that was operative during Katrina, if she was in New Orleans at the time, but the same idea pervades, is the public health model has jurisdiction, which means the sales teams have an opportunity to engage in that public health infrastructure, not one of their usual customer bases, to make a difference and get their products to market. I think those are a couple of important things. And don't, some of us are still, we're blessed that we haven't had the influx of patients like other places. And so we're keeping our strategy going. We're reducing clinical variation. We're looking for deals, and we keep moving forward because we know we've been here 130 years and we hope to be here another 130 years. And so the pandemic is not going to get in the way of that.
Thank you, Dr. Slonim. Regine, did you want to briefly respond to anything that Dr. Slonim mentioned?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I understand what he's saying because, you know, he's bringing a different perspective into this, and which is also certainly important. I completely agree about the strategy because, you know, during this time of crisis, I found myself also pivoting between the strategy and the day-to-day, you know, because he's absolutely correct in that the strategy cannot go out by the wayside. But it was also a strategic decision to not focus on certain things, at least during that time. And so, and because it was just like the onslaught and the impact, you know, from a place actually just 2 weeks before, we were deep in Mardi Gras activities and still lots of folks in the city. So that was quite interesting, you know, to have to deal with that. But I completely agree, and don't discount anything that he's saying here, because there is definitely a place for that. And at the same time, like he mentioned, you know, he was not going into the command center, but, you know, those people in the command center were the ones, you know, running the show and getting the decisions made and all that. So I truly believe that everybody has a role to play, and every role is important. You know, not only the crisis, and I know the crisis is one of those things that we're talking about, but I could also agree that the focus is not just on that. We need to continue to look at what is it that we're going to learn out of this? What is it that we're going to do differently, and how we're going to pivot, and how we're going to continue to take care of, you know, the community and the patients that come in and need our help. You know, the fact that we're ramping back up on elective surgery, bringing back that quote unquote normalcy back into, you know, the fray, to me, that's really important, because, you know, we still have people who still need to get, you know, their infusion therapies, their procedures done. And so to me, that's really important that we're pivoting back in that direction and, you know, starting to think a little bit differently as well.
You know, Laura, one of the things I would respond to, I think that Regine said this well, running healthcare today takes a broad group of people on a team working shoulder to shoulder, all of whom have different roles and responsibilities. I'm not in the command center because that's not my job. I do visit to make sure that the team has what it's needing. But I think to the other extent, members of our call should realize that there are lots of members of our team who are not necessarily head down in making sure that they've got enough. So use other members of that team to go forward. And I also think driving the innovation conversation. How can your product, how can your device, how can your medication be used in this new frame that we're all thinking about? So I'll play off of an example that Regine used, which is infusion care. Really important, scary for those people who need infusions. One of the things that we've stood up is people are afraid to come to the infusion center. They're immunosuppressed, they've got problems, they don't want to travel, they don't want to be around other people because their immune system is. So we're bringing it to their house. We started house calls this week. And so we've got teams of people on the road, not in the typical way we did home health, in a completely different way, with mid-level providers going to a home when people need it, so they can feel safe and don't need to come into our organization and be compromised.
Thank you, Dr. Slonim. Dr. Lorenz, you wanted to mention something?
Just briefly, I want to commend my colleagues on the panel for their insights, and I want to make a plug for what Dr. Slonim does, which is, he's a physician and understands intimately the implications of taking the, Hippocratic oath and, working in the trenches as a physician. And now I think, is in the best possible position to be a physician executive and be, a leader in this industry. And I think it's fantastic.
Thank you, Dr. Lenz. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about training. But first, I'd like to ask another question of our audience. Tim, can you help us out with that poll question, please?
I sure can, Laura. I'm launching the poll question right now. Folks, we'd love to find out from you. What training do reps need most now to effectively engage their customers? Is it A, virtual selling skills, B, empathy, communication, and other soft skills, C, value-based selling? There we go. Sorry, poll's launching now. C, value-based selling, or D, business planning and account management. So which of these skills are most valuable to folks? Folks, we seem to be having, let's see if that works now. We seem to be having a little bit of a trouble with the poll today. Yeah, folks, I'm sorry. The poll's not working for us. So I apologize for that, Laura. We have to move on without the poll, but sorry about that, folks.
No worries. Well, based on what our panel just said, what I was hearing them say was that there's certainly a need for more empathy and understanding of what customers are going through, and whether that falls under emotional intelligence or more training under soft skills. I think that could certainly be a need. Certainly training for virtual selling skills too. But then, also value-based selling and business planning and account management. I mean, all of the same rules still apply, whether representatives are selling virtually or in person. So in many ways, I can see where the audience might be split among those four responses, but we won't know. So we'll just have to guess. All right, so let's then talk about some of the specific training strategies that organizations can use to help their reps engage with customers in the coming months. So you'll see on your screen, we've got a few training opportunities listed that companies may want to explore during this time. So this list that we've got here primarily focuses on opportunities that are related to virtual selling. But I'd like to open it up to the panel and see what they have to say. So Regine, can I start with you, please? What kind of training do you think sales representatives should receive right now to make sure that they're equipped to adequately support their customers?
It's gonna go back. I'm gonna have a theme in when I talk about that. It's really going to be about the training that allows you to understand, the businesses of a healthcare organization such as, Ochsner, which is a multi-hospital system across the entire state of Louisiana, and truly understanding the business of Ochsner and understanding the interrelationships within the hospital as well and how that works. By that, I mean, coming in and not only understanding the business, but understanding how important it is, to engage the right players in order to advance the dialogue and to make sure that you have a good platform, because you want to start off strong when you're introducing whatever it is that you're introducing, and making sure that you're following, the rigors or whatever the organizations may have set. It's also really good to understand, have good business principle, understanding how, the financial impact of things work, how reimbursement may work, for generally for hospitals, and how a value proposition that may look interesting to you from your standpoint may not necessarily look so for an organization, and understanding how to be flexible and, bring a spirit of innovation into the dialogue, because more so now, and I think Dr. Slonim is the one who said that, one of the things that I've been doing for the past 9 weeks as well is looking at things differently and looking at them from a different lens and trying to engage others to really come up with innovative and challenging the status quo. So all of those things, I think, just generally at very high level, somebody needs to come equipped to understand the business that they're in. And I think the other part also is understanding your place in the marketplace itself, who your competitors are and what may or may not be going on. Because there's nothing more cringing than somebody coming and talking about something that, they truly have no frame of reference and don't understand exactly how it works, or how others in their own sphere is operating. So it's really important to do your research and understand the marketplace.
Thank you, Regine. I'm actually going to switch order a little bit, and I'm going to ask Dr. Lorenz what he thinks about training opportunities. So what do you see? What would be an ideal training program, or where would some gaps be that would be helpful?
I'm always impressed with how much I've been fortunate that most of the reps that come to me are actually pretty dialed in. They and I think they must they must work hard to learn the technical and legal aspects of talking about medications and devices, and yet they're usually not physicians. They're not usually even nurses or respiratory therapists. It's very impressive. I think they generally do a very good job, but that's what they need to do. They need to learn the technical background, indications for these drugs, side effects, so some clinical implications and whatnot, and they need to know. They need to target the right physicians to talk to them about. Okay, obviously, there are some crossover medications that both primary care and lung doctors use, but some that are pretty specific for what we do, and it's not always 100% clear, but they do a very, very good job of it, and that's what they need to work on. They need to be able to come right in and be very succinct, because the problem for us as physicians is we have less than zero time. I mean, we're just between all the things that are going on, especially now with all the crisis, the hassles involved. Even if the throughput in terms of number of patients is less, the hassles involved with various kinds of dealing with all the COVID crisis, all the meetings we have, changes from virtually from day to day in terms of how we're supposed to practice isolation techniques and whatnot, and just the donning and the taking off of equipment and handling people that get exposed inadvertently at the hospital. Time is shorter than ever. But we want to be respectful. Most of us do. I think it's important to meet with people, but we have to be very, very efficient about it.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenz. So before we move to our Q&A, Dr. Slonim, I was hoping maybe you could wrap up and either offer any additional training strategies that might be helpful during this time, or any other advice that you might have on what companies can do to engage their customers during this time. Any last words of advice?
Thank you, Laura. I think there's a couple, right? I mean, I love the question which said, what are the most important skills? When we are forced to use our old brain because we are in crisis or in that flight or in frenzy state, you default, right? We call it nesting, we call it what family, we call it whatever we call it, but you go to familiar circumstances because it provides comfort and protection. And I think that there's a real important engagement strategy for selling in that context. If you've had a relationship, stay true to the relationship. We default to people we know and trust, especially when we're scared and nervous. The second thing is it doesn't mean you can't form new relationships. People who have alignment in their experiences, and we're all going through the same experience. We're not exactly the same, but similar experiences. There's a human element to that we should capitalize on. I think the third thing is the technology is certainly important. And remember that people alone are tech savvy across a continuum. And so for example, here we implemented in a matter of days the Teams app, and we've been using it like crazy to facilitate our work. Well, I'm not particularly immune to change as the CEO, and I like technology. I've done a bunch of work in technology, but I'm the laggard here. I'm pulling the team down. They want to go faster, and I keep reminding people that just because you've got the technology, don't leave behind your old process. Make sure it translates. Make sure it's consistent. And then the last thing I think I would highlight, which I think is a vulnerability not only for our industry, but for humankind, if I could be philosophical for a moment, is an experience I've had with my son recently. So he's, in his late 20s, and he's a CPA in Philadelphia. And he's just changed jobs to start working in healthcare because he said, hey, Dad, this looks like it worked out pretty well for you. I'm going to give this a try. And as a result of that, he's started working in pharma, of all places, and started in the midst of the pandemic. Has not yet met his team, has not yet been to an office, has not yet, they delivered his laptop by mail. He's been working from home now for 8-9 weeks. And this would make me insane. But for him, it's just part of the normal. And if I were to translate that example into our humanness and our humankind, it's been clear for some time that we've been reliant on technology more and more often, right? We make fun of a little bit generations where they text each other versus call people on the phone. And while we're pushing through that, there's now this physical distancing that's infused in our lives. And so I really worry that the future of humankind is going to be less on that real interaction that occurs at a very personal level between two people engaged in a conversation for a goal that may not be immediate. And we have to keep persisting because it's what defines us as people and differentiates us from animals. And so I want to make sure that through all of this, we keep the humankind, keep your engagement with people going as you move forward in our work. It'll be new, it'll be different, but make sure that you live true to what you do for a living, which is to make the lives of lots of people better.
Thank you for those thoughts, Dr. Slonim. I appreciate it. Dr. Lorenz, yes?
I would echo that. Dr. Slonim, I don't know how old you are, but you look like you might be around my generation. Do you recall when we used to, the older physicians and then our generation, we started out actually, we were encouraged, we would actually sit on the bed with the patient in the hospital and talk to them.
That's exactly right. And hold their hand. And those are the kinds of things that you can't lose in this.
Exactly. I fully agree. I think it's the soft touch, high tech kind of thing, and it's different, but we'll get back to somewhere in between. And I think I always teach the medical students that if you can, even if it's only for 15 seconds, sit down when you meet a patient and talk to them for a minute, or whatever. And if you can touch them on the shoulder or something and kind of share a bond with them. Same thing with our techs and whatever. If you can, anything you can do to engage your so-called subject and and learn how to kind of communicate. And we all have different styles of communication, just like Dr. Slonim said. And you find you find the right lingo and the right way to kind of do that with people, and you get to know your client, and that helps. And then when you do that, you can actually do more, over the internet, and you can learn actually how to do it by the internet too. You gotta learn to look people in the eye, and do something to personalize it, even over the video phone or whatever. It can be done.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenz. Okay, so we have a few minutes that we could use to answer a few audience questions. So Tim, do you have a few that you'd like to pose to our panel?
Thanks, Laura. We do have some questions that came in. And I love this one from Missy. She's asking the panel members basically what platforms they prefer to use for virtual training calls: Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, FaceTime, phone only.
Dr. Lorenz, can I start with you?
The Zoom works well for multiple people. FaceTime is nice when I'm talking to patients and people on the phone. I don't like to sit for huge amounts of time. I kind of do better if I'm kind of walking around a little bit sometimes, and you're also just more flexible about where you can be. I mean, you can be waiting to do something else. Sometimes my partners and I, sometimes we've had virtual meetings with people when they're waiting to see other doctors. Anything. I think we have to use the high tech to improve efficiency and help compensate for ways areas where we lose efficiency.
Did either one of the other panel members, Regine or Dr. Slonim, did you want to make any comments on Missy's question?
I think
that pretty much any of those things would work. As far as I'm concerned, Zoom, Skype, Teams, WebEx, all those things work. And I mean, the good thing is that now most of them are also transferable on your phone. So to Dr. Lorenz's point, some of those things you can be on a Zoom call and be on your phone and still, be going around your business. And Skype and all of those things have become almost like a cornerstone of communication, and more so in the past few weeks. But I think that works well, and I think it's going to be, unfortunately, for a little bit at least, the world that we're going to live in, that virtual world, until we have an opportunity to come back together again and exercise that humanness that Dr. Slonim talked about, because I think that's also really important that we move forward and not lose that touch. But I think at least in the foreseeable future, a lot of those tools are going to be the ones that are preferred when it comes to communicating and getting together. So any and all of those, really would work.
Dr. Slonim, did you have anything to add?
No, I think we just, I think everybody said it, we have to be agnostic. We have to just take what comes to us. That's the tool itself isn't the thing that's going to drive the conversation. They all work kind of similar for me.
Thank you. All right, Tim, do we have time to take one more question?
We do. Yeah, I'm going to throw out a comment before I take a question, though. Michael in the audience said, thank you, everybody. It's a good program. He suggested we might want to do this same topic again in about 8 weeks and see what's changed. Just curious if the panel thinks, is anything going to change in 8 weeks?
Huh. I think that's a great idea. It'd be interesting. Absolutely.
Things are always changing. Sure.
Yeah, there you go. Let me throw out this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Slonim.
No. I think for me, the thing is, that's why you focus on strategy. Strategy is ever present. There are changes in the way that you do things, but I have to, for our community, have a 5 to 10 year time horizon. And so whether it's this crisis or another crisis, our job is to work through the crisis. We're all about value-based care. That's where we're going. And the change will be that we will accelerate that. So we're looking to go to risk-based contracting 100% by January 21. And that's only come by virtue of the pandemic. And so we know we don't have the time to wait. It's about getting to execution. And but but the work underground is the same. We're here to take care of people.
Excellent. Well, Laura, we are at the top of the hour, and I know that our panelists need to get back to more important things, or other important things, I should say. So I'm going to go ahead and close out Q&A. Folks, if we did not get to your question, I apologize for that. We will try to get answers for you offline. For now, let me go ahead and thank our panelists very quickly. Regine Vallon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Dr. Anthony Slonim, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be here with you, Laura.
Thank you. And Dr. Gifford Lorenz, thank you again, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And Laura, thank you as well. I'm going to let you close out the comments here on the panel, but thank you for joining us, and great job.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And I'd also like to invite you to follow the link that's on your screen at the bottom there. By doing so, you can gain access to several resources that will help you in your journey to being a partner now and in the future with your customers. CMR Institute's nonprofit mission is to provide innovative learning resources that support the relationship between the life sciences industry and the healthcare professionals that they serve. For more than 50 years, CMR has provided relevant and ready e-learning resources to improve the value offered by customer-facing teams and ultimately to enhance healthcare. So please go ahead and follow the link. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. And we're getting a lot of messages in from the audience. Everybody, thank you for sharing your thoughts. We're getting a lot of thank yous, a lot of great webinars. And Missy says, this is the best webinar of the 100 she has participated in. Missy, that's a nice comment. Thank you so much.
Here.
And I would echo that, but of course I'm biased.
Excellent.
Everybody, thank you so much. There you go. Folks, just as we close out today, I'm going to tell you all very quickly as you file out today about L10 Connect. It's our new virtual learning forum. It's coming, debuting June 9th to 11th. It's taking place for a few hours each of those days with some on-demand items as well. You can always check in on your own schedule. Please do check it out at l10connect.com. You'll see here a list of some of our speakers, as well as I have workshop sessions, the L10 Excellence Awards, keynotes, learning labs, L10 talks, very different speaking opportunities, and a chance for you to network and also visit a virtual expo hall. So please do plan on joining us for L10 Connect, June 9th to 11th. I also want to point out just a few other resources available for you on the L10 website and through the L10 On The Go app. We have our webinars like you've been through today, Focus Magazine articles, our Total Trainer Certificate programs, the Preferred Industry Partner and Training Directory, Partner Directory, and of course the L10 E-Learning Lounge, our micro-learning learning repository. So please do feel free to check out any or all of those for your learning needs and your industry needs. And finally, I'm going to invite you all back to our next webinar. We'll be back with 3 programs next week, including Tuesday's program on virtual training and coaching strategies. Hope you can join us for those programs. You can register at this address here. Down here on the on-demand webinar, our self-directed learning library is where we're going to post a recording of today's program. It'll be up within the hour. We're also going to send you an email later today with a direct link to that recording as well. So everybody, let me send out a final thank you to our panelists, a final thank you to CMR Institute for sponsoring today's program, and a final thank you to all of you in the audience for participating throughout today's program. Look forward to seeing you back here for next week's webinar. In the meanwhile, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and everybody please stay safe. Bye-bye, everyone.